Tonight we'll be learning more about visualization, a great topic from Kiela Upton Smith. And just to note, for all of our listeners, please note that we're able to interact with you, and we really do want to through two ways during this teleconference. On our Facebook page, the page is www.facebook.com/IgniteYourSoulConnection, or you can press 1 on your touchtone keypad or mobile device, and the moderator will make sure that your question is is noted to be answered. So let's go ahead and get a little information about Kiela. Kiela Smith Upton, or Upton Smith, is a visionary and professionally trained fine artist, muralist, and arts consultant reared in a family of architects. She received her BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and also studied in Cote d'Ivoire, West Africa, with Parsons School of Design. Her personal artwork explores the inner world of intuition with lightweight concrete sculpture and mixed media drawings. She is a recognized expert with 20-plus years of experience in inspiring and transforming people and places with collaborative interior and exterior murals. She also facilitates the Vision Board Workshop experience with her business partner, Talea Stovall, at Kiela's 4,000-square-foot art studio. Hi, Kiela. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Great. I'm so glad you chose to join us. You know, we're looking forward to hearing about your topic and you, and you know what a great lineup we had so far. So I'm really glad that you're next in line. So before we get into your topic and a few other things, why don't you tell our listeners on the teleconference a bit more about you? I shared your bio, but you know let's hear a bit more of it from your side.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I'm very grateful that we're having this opportunity to share a piece of what I've been so fortunate to live these last decades of my life. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and attended Chicago Public Schools, and I was raised by both my mother and my father in different homes. But my father is an architect, and my brother subsequently became an architect, and they both had a business together for nearly 20 years. And my entire life, my father has been an architect, but you know how when you sit around with family and you look at pictures and it reminds you of things in your life that you may not have remembered or didn't have a conscious recollection of, there's lots of images and pictures of my brother and I doing things like visiting museums when I was 4 and 5 and going places. I remember lots of cultural experiences when I was very young. And so I grew up feeling very free to explore and was exposed to a lot of things, which I came to find out later was quite intentional on my father's part. And to the point where even when I was little, I painted or drew a mural on my wall, or so my mother tells me. I really don't remember it. But my cousin and I drew this mural on my wall in my bedroom, and my mom said it was so pretty. She just didn't have the heart to paint it over, but she was upset because we didn't own the place. We rented. And so it was a hard struggle for her to decide, do I paint it over and discourage my child, or do I leave it? So she left it up for a while. And as I moved forward in my life and subsequently attended School of the Art Institute of Chicago, I didn't even know there were other art schools, really. It wasn't a conscious thing. My art teacher in high school said, oh, you should go to the Art Institute. And I said, okay. And I went and I applied, and they gave me a merit scholarship based on my portfolio, which helped with the private school tuition. And then at the same time that I started art school, I discovered murals and had met someone who did murals in Chicago who exposed me to murals. And because I had grown up in an architectural setting, looking at drawings of buildings and pictures of buildings and sitting at my dad's drafting table for years just waiting for him to get finished working, I very naturally gravitated to this idea of creating artwork on a building. And then was reminded when I grew a little older by my father that I used to go with him sometimes to other people's houses. He would paint graphics on their walls. I'd help him put the tape up, and he taught me how you wait till the paint dries and you pull the tape so you get a nice straight line. And so there are all these pieces of my life that have come together really in something that I've been doing in small ways all along and wasn't fully conscious of as a child, but all came together in this great mix that fed what was already there in me. And I'm just so grateful that my parents allowed it and nurtured it despite whatever fears they may have had. Oh my God, she wants to be an artist. And I graduated from, well, actually I went to Ivory Coast, like you said, Côte d'Ivoire, technically, and I studied the art of the Sinufo and Baoulé people for a month, and did a beautiful portfolio of photographs. I fell in love with photography for a while, and the great thing about the Art Institute is, one, they allow you to do a lot of interdisciplinary work. So whatever you're interested in whatever way you want to engage it, you can. And good or bad, they don't give grades. You just pass or fail. And so it allowed a lot of opportunity to really be who I was and really express and indulge my creativity in a way that a different sort of environment I don't imagine would have. And because I started doing murals early while I was still in college, the first one I did was I volunteered. And then after that, I was so hooked and I really just wanted to do more. I was asked if I wanted to serve as an assistant, and they would pay me. And I'm in college, right? I'm going, oh my God, somebody's going to pay me to do art? And so that's all she wrote, really. When I think about it, I look back, it's been 21 years. And I still love it. And I connected with an organization called Chicago Public Art Group. The person who introduced me to the Chicago mural movement introduced me also to Chicago Public Art Group, where I have been mentored and loved and challenged and pushed by a host of artists some of who became my mentors, because creating murals, it's not, you can't go get a degree in it. It's not a process that is taught in college. You learn the basic of the arts, but the mural arts have their own specific considerations and skills and needs, and so I learned that by doing it and living it and walking it and breathing it and dreaming it. And what has come for me is this incredible sense and knowledge of how, not only how empowering a mural can be when it's created from a space of wanting to give and help bring forth a vision for a whole community, but then on top of that, I was taught and mentored through a process where we actually would go in and work with a community of non-artists to help bring a collective vision to life, and then do that within a collaborative art-making experience where we
That's
literally,
really interesting.
Yeah. So I could go on and on. I just dream and eat and think murals. But the only other thing I wanted to say about murals is that I started out doing painted murals, and then a few years later I started doing mosaic murals, and that's really been the mainstay of it. And I didn't even talk about the vision board workshops, but I guess we'll get to that.
Okay. Well, one of the things that you were talking about that I wanted to hear a bit more about is your father. You mentioned that, the things that he would have you do or be exposed to was intentional. And I would like to get more of an idea about that because, it's interesting when you talk about, nurturing children and for them to be able to expand or embrace their creativity or visualize certain things for themselves. A great part of it is exploration and exposure. So could you share a bit more about that?
Absolutely. My father was the first person in his family to go to college, and in addition to that, he was studying architecture, which is a really fairly obscure field for African Americans in particular, and African Americans at that time when he was doing it, which was in the mid to late 60s. So he in studying architecture, minored in psychology and was very active and felt that education was important. And he knew and also learned, I'm sure, about the value and the power of just what you're talking about, exposure. Because he didn't, when he was growing up, had he not had a stepfather when he got older who was an engineer, he probably never would have even known the field existed. So from what I've gotten from what he's told me, it was a very conscious point on his part to say, let me expose my children to things so that they know what's out here and they know what's possible. And it really gives you, when I look back at it, it gave me a sense as a child of just the buffet that there is in the world and in life and that you can choose from.
Absolutely. I would say that, that I could definitely relate because, although my parents, I would say particularly my father, outside of for work, I mean, even with his, successful business, he's never, really been, out of the country outside of, something that's like Mexico or, the Virgin Islands, for work. But outside of that, I mean, no Europe, no Africa, any of that. And my parents, though, when I grew up, and my godparents were always really, I don't know how to explain it, but they were just very, very into making sure I went somewhere or was a part of this organization or that, and I was a debutante and all of this stuff. And it was so annoying at first because it just seemed like I always had somewhere to go or something to do. But growing up, and now as an adult, I see how that has, really shaped my life in a positive way, being comfortable, anywhere I am in the world simply because I got used to, traveling and the idea of being around people that are not as familiar intergenerationally, interculturally, and otherwise at a young age. So, I definitely can relate to that.
Absolutely. That's essential. And then I think in this day and age, for anyone that has younger children in particular, but even the older ones, in the global society that we live in today, it's almost a tragedy if a child doesn't, even if they don't have the opportunity to travel, but if they're not exposed to things so that they can really see their worldview and even their career possibilities are real limited unless they are just very gregarious and take a lot of initiative, which isn't necessarily your average child.
Yeah, well, these days, if you have at the very least, access to the internet or mobile devices, you're plugged in a way that, kids, 10, 20 years ago never could be. So, in that regard, there's no real excuse. Another thing I wanted to touch on really quickly is your work with the community of non-artists. I'd definitely be interested in hearing more about that. It seems like that would be a very interesting space for growth on both sides as far as, the topic that we'll be getting into shortly for the creative process as well as visualization for them.
Well, the way that I was taught murals, and subsequently mosaic murals, with Chicago Public Art Group specifically was community-based public art. That was kind of the definition. And some unspoken, some spoken, but it was for the purpose of going into a community and crystallizing and helping bringing into manifestation the unspoken visions or the unspoken dreams and the collective whole, or at least the different visions within that, to create a collective vision of a community. That community could be a school. It could be a neighborhood. In the case of, say, South Evanston, where I did this mural that's 326 feet long, we had 170 volunteers.
Wow.
We would have community design days. This was back in 1993. We would have community design days where I would facilitate a process where first we'd have brainstorming conversation. What are the issues? What are the concerns? What are the dreams in this community? And we would do that, and then from that we would guide people to say, okay, so how does that express itself visually? And then from there we would take those visuals And myself and my assistant took those, did a little additional background research, and created a final design composition, but it all came